A new study on Canadian Jewry was published recently by Robert Brym. There's a great cover article about it in the inaugural issue of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's new print magazine. And last week, a section of the research focusing on intermarriage in Canada was released in the Canadian Jewish Studies Journal. The numbers show that intermarriage is no longer as rare as it used to be in Canada, with a 7 to 9 point jump since 2021 to around 30%. That's a little confusing because they use two different definitions, right? Jews by religion and Jews by standard definition. I personally tend to think of myself as a high definition Jew, but that's a different discussion. Younger Jews are more likely to intermarry than older ones, and men are more likely to do so than women. I can go down the numbers rabbit hole, but I'm sure more of this will emerge over the discussion. I want to start with you, Phoebe. I know we've talked about it on Bonjour Chai. You're an astute observer of the Canadian Jewish landscape. What are some of the things that jumped out at you from this new study?
I mean, so I should say I know much more about intermarriage in 19th century France than I do about really anything to do with Canadian Jewish anything, because I did my doctoral dissertation on this topic. Mm-hmm. But the thing that jumped out at me, and the reason I wanted to do this pod with you guys here about it, is how different the numbers are for Canada than for the States. That was the thing that really struck me, in conjunction with the fact that anecdotally, with all the caveats about anecdotes, I know many Jewish families in my part of Toronto, and I don't know that any are like cases where there are like 4 Jewish grandparents, right? Like it's either the parents are intermarried or their parents were intermarried or something like this, right? So I know a ton of intermarried Jewish households in Canada, arguably more than I would in the States. And I'm wondering whether, like just basically how to explain this, whether it's that I'm seeing some unrepresentative sample of Canadian Jews, or whether it's being measured differently in Canada versus the States, like who's Jewish and who isn't, things like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that you probably are seeing a representative sample of Canadian Jewry outside of Orthodox populations, or outside of like places where establishment Jews, right? Jews that go to synagogue semi-regularly or involved with Federation or other major Jewish organizations, they tend to not be in downtown areas. And I think the numbers, once you pull those things out, tend to skew things very differently. But on the point of the orthodoxy, Matthew, you are not an Orthodox rabbi, and I believe you do perform intermarriages.
I have been for a long time, even before I was a rabbi for many years, yeah.
Do you find yourself having to defend that action, or do you...
defend what I do, you mean? Or the marriages?
Both. Or do you find that, like, at this point, it's a fait accompli and people just accept it and move on?
I've been doing... I usually call them dual faith weddings, because I found that, like, intermarriage and interfaith have just such a negative connotation that, you know, words are important. So I've been doing these dual faith ceremonies since 2013, like 12 years. And I've only been a rabbi since 2017. So for a number of years before that. And I think that was kind of an easier way to come to it. Was I'm not a rabbi. This is kind of an easier thing to do, because the landscape in Winnipeg, like in a lot of places in 2013, was you couldn't find very many people who were rabbis or with rabbinic style training, like super educated lay people who would be able to officiate these ceremonies. So then I noticed that there were people coming and coming and coming. Like this was a trend we've been hearing about for a long time, but I'm seeing with my own eyes that people are doing this. But early on, what gave me a lot of confidence and why I don't really get a lot of pushback about this is because I did a ceremony and there was an elderly couple there and I knew them well from the community. He was a successful businessman, a Holocaust survivor. And after the ceremony, he pulled me over to the side and he said, you know, I was really, really torn about coming. I think this wedding was back in 2015. And he said to me, I was really, really torn on coming because, you know, she's Jewish and we know her whole family, but this guy she's marrying, I'm sure he's fine, but, you know, he's not Jewish. And I really didn't know what this was like. And then he kind of smiled at me and said, but the way you did it, this was a good thing. So that interaction, that story, I mean, I've been in a position where I've been a young man in an old man's world, an old person's world, for a long time, working in the synagogue as a 19-year-old. I always try to be very careful to balance what I was taking from an older crowd in terms of, are they being stuck in their ways or are they being open to change? And when this fellow in that moment was very open to it, I realized this is not something people are fighting back on the way they probably used to. They just want it to be given the right kind of treatment, the right context. You know, it wasn't a Jewish wedding, and I didn't treat it like a straight Jewish wedding, but it recognized the fact that this could be a positive union, that this still could further Judaism with their children, and better, and this is the whole reason I did it in the first place, better that they would have somebody who would be a positive rabbinic Jewish spiritual leader figure and give it even a chance. Because for so long, everyone said, no chance. You guys are bad. I can't officiate your wedding. You're done. Well, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy right there. So you got to give them a chance by giving them a positive experience. That's always steered me true, and I've been doing it for 12 years. And at least a third of the weddings, I would say, I do, of the 15 or so a year, are probably dual faith, if not more, closer between a third and a half. Yeah.
So actually, you know, I think that these two settings, right? The fact that somebody is in Roncesvalles in Toronto, not part of this large established Jewish community that is in Toronto, and somebody who's in Winnipeg who is smaller, and then the numbers actually show that the stats are skewed if you're outside of Montreal and Toronto, really encapsulate everything that's going on in this study in two different poles, right? You have Orthodoxy, which has had a large grip on, or traditionalism, which has a large grip on Canadian society and Canadian Jewish society until fairly recently. But if you're not part of that world, and for you, traditionalism and Orthodoxy and law, and this is the way things have always been done, is not part of your world, then it's become a lot more acceptable for that to happen. And if you're still part of the world where that is important and strong, then the numbers drop precipitously in Canada, less so in the US, although even in the US, the numbers are very different for the two. And, you know, and again, it's not about putting a value on saying Orthodoxy is better and therefore, you know, intermarriage is good or not. I think that Orthodoxy has always had a very negative approach and sent that out into the world. And when you started having liberal Jews who were essentially saying this is okay, then you find people that are involved Jews that are doing Jewish things that are then saying, great, this is something that I can do and still feel proudly Jewish about and do those things.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Phoebe.
Yeah, something I wanted to talk about. So the thing, when I say I did a dissertation on intermarriage, there are a lot of aspects of it, and I'm not going to obviously get into all of them. This was a 500-page document that my poor professors had to at least claim to have read. But the thing that strikes me for this particular conversation is that Napoleon wanted to make it so that Jews in the French Empire had to intermarry. He wanted to mandate that a certain number of weddings involving a Jew involved also a non-Jew. And civil marriage was only very recent at the time, and there were barely any Jews marrying non-Jews at the time, even though it had just become legal, right? But the reason Napoleon wanted this was effectively to get rid of Jews, right? And there has been this kind of continuous thing that certainly people have different interests, right? You know, like some, obviously, when you have Jews talking about, like certainly post-war Jews saying, don't intermarry, it'll be a second Holocaust. The point is not wanting, obviously, fewer Jews, wanting to have more Jews. But what's interesting that I was just reading about is that it seems like the demographic assumption from Jews, friends and foes, has long been that intermarriage means fewer Jews. And that may not always be the thing, right? It might be that intermarriage doesn't decrease the numbers. So this leads to my question, I guess mainly for Avi, but I guess potentially we can just all talk about it, is like how much of the, like a sort of a negative Jewish sentiment towards traditionalists, let's say, towards intermarriage is about continuity and how much is about religion?
I think it's a great question because I actually think that the two got confused in probably the past half century or so, maybe even, you know, almost the past 100 years, where I think that the sentiment for 2,000 years against intermarriage was about religion, was that you can't practice multiple faiths. And there was no, as you said, civil marriage. There was no cultural, well, we're just two people getting married, so you're going to be married to another faith, and therefore it is impossible or difficult or whatever it is, and there's laws about it from a religious perspective. But as you move more and more towards a secular society, what we see happening is the argument is about continuity, but continuity for continuity's sake. And that's where everything falls apart because, as you're pointing out, great, we have more people that identify with Jews and Judaism if you intermarry because you're sending out more stuff, and it's the opposite of keeping it within your community. And I think that the continuity argument isn't a great argument. It falls apart because at the end of the day, you're 100% right from a continuity perspective, Phoebe. And it's only from a religious perspective that it strongly lasts to go and say that, you know, intermarriage is not something that is a good value for the continuity of the Jewish people, because at the end of the day, faith is not easy to multiply or to do whatever. And when you have secular Jews who are just arguing for the continuity of it, I think that message really gets lost, and it's not a good message. And that's why, quote unquote, the people that see we're losing the intermarriage debate are feeling it as losing. And the people that just see it as, well, no, we want to be out there in the world, are seeing it as winning. Matthew, I feel like you have a lot to you've been wanting to jump in.
No, I just want to throw out there that I think that there is actually a kind of very easy fix. And that would be across the board accepting a patrilineal descent within Judaism. If every union involving one Jewish person guaranteed to produce Jewish kids and there was no fight over this, you solve the religion and you solve the continuity argument.
I think that would work outside of the Orthodox context, but I think there would be a lot of difficulty for there.
If the mother's Jewish, the kids are Jewish?
Sure, technically, but I think that what Orthodoxy wants, or what traditional Judaism wants, is practice on a regular basis. And again, as I said, unless it's two people practicing, you don't have that that strong Jewish life within the home.